July 10, 1944, near Saint-Lô, Normandy. Dawn seeps cold and colorless through the bocage. Mist clings to the hedgerows, sweet with crushed nettles and diesel. From a sunken lane, crews of the 2nd SS Panzer Division das Reich idle a Panther Ausf. Its Maybach humming steady, the steel hull beaded with dew. Then, one flat cough from the hedgerow opposite, not the ripping thunder of an 75mm gun, but something small, abrupt, almost unimpressive. A thin gray filament traces across the lane. A heartbeat later, a blunt crack, a punch of light, and the Panther lurches, flame licking from a ragged hole low on the right side plate. Impossible, a gunner thinks as smoke curls upward, slow and oily. Their glacis is 80mm at 55 degrees. No rifle grenade can do this, yet the hit came from less than 80 meters, from a kneeling American with a mere metal tube. Crewmen scramble. Another Panther slews to cover, tracks grinding wet clay. Through binoculars, an SS lieutenant glimpses the culprit, 2 men melting back into the green, one cradling a 2.36-inch launcher. Reports hiss over field telephones. Shaped charge, infantry portable, range inside 100 meters, side armor perforated. The side plate, 40-50mm, has been bored through as if pressed by a hot awl. Spall has scythed the fighting compartment. A sergeant mutters that Allied infantry now carry tank guns on their shoulders. The shock is not just in the loss of a Panther, but in the erasure of certainty. Hedgerows can hide a weapon that makes any lane a killing ground. In that moment, the rumor hardens into fact. American infantry have a rocket that defeats German armor, and the question rushes upward through command. How did the Allies put such power in a tube? The answer begins far from the hedgerows, in laboratories where a new principle of explosives was tamed. By 1940, the world had learned to fear the sound of treads. Across the fields of France and the Low Countries, the German blitzkrieg tore through defenses that had once seemed secure. Columns of Panzer IIIs and IVs led the way, their 50mm and short-barreled 75mm guns shredding bunkers, while infantry followed under the cloak of speed and coordination. To Allied foot soldiers, these tanks were not just machines, they were moving fortresses. Rifle fire pinged uselessly from sloped plates. Grenades bounced away like pebbles, and by the time an anti-tank gun was unlimbered, the Panzers were already through. Even Britain's boy's anti-tank rifle, once heralded as a solution, could barely dent early German armor. The Wehrmacht's seamless fusion of mobility and firepower rewrote ground warfare. When American forces joined the fighting in North Africa in late 1942, they found themselves in the same trap. The 37mm M3 anti-tank gun, nicknamed the Door Knocker, could scarcely penetrate the frontal armor of a Panzer IV. Infantrymen resorted to hand-thrown grenades bundled together. Improvised mines or Molotov cocktails, brave but often suicidal measures. In Tunisia and Sicily, GIs saw the full measure of their disadvantage. When German armor appeared, men instinctively ducked, waiting for tank destroyers or aircraft to intervene. Confidence eroded. Even the toughest platoon felt naked in open ground. Reports from the Eastern Front only deepened the alarm. U.S. intelligence described the new Tiger I with its 88mm gun and 100mm armor, and rumors spoke of an even more formidable design, the Panther, with sloped plates capable of defeating any Allied shell. The conclusion was inescapable. If infantry were to survive, they needed a weapon they could carry, aim, and fire without a crew or carriage. At Aberdeen Proving Ground, engineers of the Army Ordnance Department began experimenting with a lightweight launcher that could hurl a rocket-driven shaped charge. By late 1942, prototypes were striking through inches of steel plate, proof that chemistry and ingenuity might finally give a man on foot a chance against a tank. The balance between armor and infantry was about to shift again, this time on America's terms. Saw the M1 rocket launcher take shape at U.S. Army Proving Grounds under Colonel Leslie Skinner and Ordnance, Officer Edward Ohl. Designed as a lightweight tube, the launcher measured 236 inches in bore and was soon standardized as the M1. Its warhead, the M6 Heat, weighed roughly 1.6 kilograms and used a hollow conical liner to form a molten jet that could pierce approximately 75 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor. A solid fuel rocket motor carried the projectile to its target, giving a practical engagement envelope of roughly 100 yards. The launcher itself weighed only about 6 kilograms and relied on simple iron sights, a shoulder stock, and a battery-initiated electrical firing system. Servicemen quickly christened the device the Bazooka. Early firing trials demonstrated the shaped charge principle in blunt terms. Against perpendicular plate at close range, the jet punched clean holes. But in service, the system showed teething troubles. Rockets dispersed unevenly, fins sometimes failed to stabilize flight, batteries sputtered in wet weather, and backblast imposed tactical limits in confined terrain. Field reports from North Africa and training notes flagged both its promise and its faults, lightweight mobility and lethal armor effect, countered by reliability questions and the need for close approach. Engineers answered fast. Fuses and liners were refined, production tolerances tightened, and unit doctrine evolved toward short-range ambushes and coordinated team drills so an infantry squad could deliver a crippling shot and vanish. Mass production followed, factories turning out launchers while units practiced firing drills regularly. What the designers had created, crude though it was a new category of infantry weapon. A man-portable rocket that turned a private into an anti-armor threat. That technical leap would meet its trial by fire when American units brought the launcher to the bocage and the open fields of Western Europe. The bazooka's baptism of fire came amid the dust and confusion of Tunisia in early 1943. At Kasserine Pass, soldiers of the U.S. 1st Infantry Division faced German Panzer III and IV tanks advancing confidently through the narrow valley. Few in the ranks trusted the new weapon yet. Its open tube and fragile wiring looked more like a prototype than a battlefield tool. But when a squad fired from behind a stony ridge at less than 70 yards, the result stunned even its operators. The rocket struck the flank of a Panzer III, and a jet of molten copper sliced through the armor, sending the tank erupting in black smoke. Within minutes, German crews began bailing out of neighboring vehicles, shaken by the sight of infantry apparently armed with invisible artillery. Field reports recorded that enemy tanks withdrew under small arms fire once a rocket trail was observed. Yet the North African victory was only a rehearsal. By June 1944, the Allies carried the improved M1A1 and M9 variants into Normandy's tangled hedgerows. Here, the weapon faced the true giants of German engineering, Panthers and Tigers, whose frontal armor exceeded the bazooka's penetration limit. American soldiers adapted with ruthless ingenuity, using the bocage itself as cover. They stalked tanks through narrow lanes, waiting for the flanks to expose thinner plates, firing from barely 50 yards before melting back into cover. Reports from the 29th and 4th Infantry Divisions described platoons assigning bazooka teams to every squad, treating them as essential rather than auxiliary weapons. Among the countless improvisations, none captured imagination like that of Lieutenant Charles Bazooka Charlie Carpenter. Flying a Piper L-4 Grasshopper observation plane, he mounted 6 launchers to its wing struts, using them to dive at German armor and score confirmed kills. His legend embodied the new spirit of infantry defiance. What had begun as an emergency solution in Tunisia had, by Normandy, evolved into a confident doctrine of infantry-led anti-tank warfare. For the first time since 1940, the armored fist of the Wehrmacht had reason to hesitate. By the summer of 1943, German tank crews were already whispering about a new American weapon, something small, silent until launch and capable of punching through steel. When the first captured launchers arrived from Sicily, engineers at WWII-Proof 6, the Wehrmacht's technical testing office, studied them with disbelief. The Americans called it the M1 rocket launcher, a simple steel tube that fired a 60mm shaped charge projectile. Its principle, the hollow charge effect, or Hohlladung, was known in theory but never perfected in so compact a form. German analysts noted that even light infantry could now kill a panzer without artillery or air support, an alarming disruption to battlefield hierarchy. Internal memos labeled it the Panzerschreck, literally, tank-destroying tube. As reports from the Eastern and Western fronts confirmed its effectiveness, German engineers set out to build their own version. By late 1943, the Raketenpanzerbüchse 43, soon nicknamed the Panzerschreck, emerged from workshops in Magdeburg. It was an enlarged 88mm version of the American design, firing a heavier rocket capable of penetrating up to 160mm of armor, double the bazooka's capacity. But it came with trade-offs. At nearly 11 kilograms and 1.6 meters long, the Panzerschreck required a two-man crew and a blast shield to protect against backblast and debris. Still, it gave German infantry a weapon worthy of their armored adversaries. The irony was unmistakable. The nation that had once terrified Europe with its tank-led blitzkrieg was now copying a foreign infantry weapon to survive its own creation. Reports from Normandy in 1944 showed the psychological tide turning. Panther commanders reported isolated soldiers with rocket tubes crippling tanks from close range. Confidence in armor supremacy dissolved. Orders went out to all Panzer units. No advance without infantry screen, no lone tank movement in bocage. The shock had come full circle. The hunter was now being hunted. America's factories smelled of hot steel and oil. On assembly lines, men and women moved with the grim rhythm of total war. Once the bazooka's battlefield value was established, American industry pivoted from prototype to volume production with astonishing speed. General Electric, Bell Telephone Manufacturing, and dozens of subcontractors stamped out launch tubes, machined firing contacts, and assembled warheads in plants that ran day and night. The weapon's genius was its simplicity. Standardized steel tubing, a modest battery ignition, and a shaped charge warhead that did the destructive work. Training cadres found that a motivated squad could teach recruits basic aiming, misfire drills, and teamwork in a single afternoon, instantly multiplying the infantry's anti-tank reach. Late 1943 improvements, the M9 and M9A1 models, added a 3.5-volt battery system and a collapsible two-piece tube for easier transport, while rockets such as the M6A3 gained deeper cone liners and improved fuses that pushed penetration nearer to 100 millimeters. Factories produced launchers and rockets by the thousands. Wooden crates of ammunition were packed, loaded onto Liberty ships, and funneled through sustainment hubs from Norfolk to the invasion beaches, then forward along rail and truck routes to depots at Cherbourg, Le Havre, and Antwerp. That industrial web did more than arm U.S. divisions. Under Lend-Lease and direct supply arrangements, bazooka kits and rounds equipped Free French, British, and Chinese units, synchronizing Allied anti-tank techniques across theaters. The mass production story was not just numbers, but doctrine in motion. When entire regiments arrived with trained bazooka teams, commanders could count on infantry to contest armor in close country. With production and distribution secured, the next battlefield problem was tactical: how to use hundreds of thousands of new launchers to maximum effect against a still-evolving German tank force, and win battles. Normandy's countryside was a maze of earth and hedgerow, tight lanes hemmed by walls of tangled roots and thorn that turned every approach into a tunnel of ambush. In this claustrophobic world, the bazooka became a natural predator. At St. Lo, July 1944, American infantry learned to fight tanks at whispering distance. A Panther could crawl no faster than a walking man. Its long 75mm gun was useless against a target hidden in the brush only 30 yards away. Bazooka teams waited in drainage ditches and shell holes, the smell of damp earth and cordite heavy in the air, holding fire until the steel shape loomed close enough to blot out the lane. One shot, an incandescent streak, and seconds later a roar as molten metal vented through hatches. Reports from the 30th Infantry Division told of German columns halted by a handful of men firing from three sides, leaving Panthers smoldering in lanes too narrow to turn around. At Mortain in August, where Hitler's counterattack tried to sever the American advance, bazooka men became the hinge of defense. Platoons improvised crossfires, striking from the flanks where the rocket's shaped charge could penetrate the Panther's thinner side armor. Many fired at 30 to 40 yards, almost suicidal range, but each successful hit emboldened the next. Veterans spoke of the strange calm that followed a kill, the clang of burning tracks, the faint crackle of hedgerow fire, and the realization that flesh and will had bested steel. As the Allies surged east, the bazooka proved equally lethal against bunkers and machine gun nests, its jet of plasma boring through concrete where grenades failed. German infantry began to hesitate before advancing with armor, knowing the hedgerows could conceal unseen rocketeers. By autumn 1944, every company commander demanded more launchers. The bazooka had evolved from an experimental weapon into a symbol of infantry self-reliance, proof that courage, precision, and a steel tube could stand against the strongest tanks of Europe. By August 1944, the myth of German armor's invulnerability was visibly cracking. Reports from Panzer Division told of ambushes where entire columns were halted not by artillery, but by small, unseen teams carrying the dreaded rocket tube. The Wehrmacht's response was desperate and inventive. Panthers and Panzerfours received Schürzen, thin, bolted side skirts designed to trigger shaped charges before they struck the main armor. When those proved too heavy and prone to damage in the hedgerows, engineers introduced lighter wire mesh panels, the so-called Thoma shields, stretched like fencing around the tank's flanks and turrets. Crews began carrying smoke candles and firing Nebelgranaten from onboard launchers to blind the narrow lanes before advancing. Standard procedure demanded high-explosive shells be loosed into every hedge or farmhouse window that looked suspicious, hoping to preempt a lurking bazooka. Yet these measures were half-successes at best. The shaped charge jet of the M6 rocket often punched through even after striking the skirts, and the confined terrain of Normandy meant smoke dispersed unevenly. Tanks that fired preemptively revealed their own positions, inviting artillery or airstrikes in return. After-action reports read like confessions of unease. Enemy infantry weapons capable of destroying tanks at point-blank range. Even the Panzerschreck, Germany's formidable answer to the bazooka, could not restore confidence. It was too cumbersome for offensive thrusts, its backblast betraying the firer in close quarters. Among the veterans of elite panzer divisions, a new tension set in. Every hedgerow seemed to whisper danger, every church ruin might conceal a tube. The psychological balance had reversed. Once symbols of unstoppable might, German tanks were now hulking targets advancing into invisible fire. The age of the armored knight was ending. The age of the empowered infantryman had begun. By 1945, the bazooka had spread across every major front, becoming the common denominator of Allied infantry power. In Italy, where the mountains turned tank combat into an uphill struggle, the U.S. Fifth Army used the launcher as both a bunker buster and an anti-vehicle weapon. Its shaped charge warhead punched through reinforced walls, and the frontal armor of German self-propelled guns dug into slopes above the Liri Valley. In France and the Low Countries, Free French battalions wielded it against retreating panzer units on the road to the Rhine, while British airborne troops carried collapsible M9A1s during the crossing of the Rhine in March 1945. Half a world away, the bazooka found new purpose in the Pacific. Against Japan's light Type 95 Heigo tanks, its rockets punched cleanly through armor no thicker than 12 mm, often igniting fuel tanks in a single hit. At Iwo Jima and Okinawa, Marines learned to turn the weapon into a siege tool, firing at cave mouths, pillboxes, and even airfield bunkers. Combat reports from the 4th and 5th Marine Divisions describe bazooka teams advancing under covering fire to blast open cave systems, clearing them grenade by grenade after each rocket strike. The weapon's portability made it indispensable in jungle and island warfare, where artillery could not always follow. Through Lend-Lease, bazookas reached Chinese nationalist forces fighting in Burma and even Soviet troops on the Eastern Front. By the final months of the war, over 1 million Allied soldiers had trained to use it, from paratroopers in Holland to GIs in the Ardennes. In April 1945, as Berlin fell, German Volkssturm units scavenged captured examples and even produced crude copies for city defense. The weapon that once shocked the Wehrmacht had become the symbol of the global infantryman's new authority. the era when a single soldier could command the fate of steel. The introduction of the bazooka marked a quiet revolution in the doctrine of land warfare. Before 1943, tanks had dictated the rhythm of battle. Infantry existed to follow in their wake, clearing what armor could not crush. But after the bazooka's arrival, the old logic collapsed. Tanks could no longer range freely ahead. Every thicket, wall, or ruined house might conceal a man with the power to end a 45-ton machine. Commanders on both sides were forced to relearn combined arms tactics. Infantry screened armor, armor suppressed enemy infantry, and engineers cleared the lanes where hidden rocketeers might lurk. For the Allies, this evolution was codified in doctrine by mid-1944. The bazooka was not merely a defensive tool. It allowed infantry to seize and hold ground without waiting for tank or artillery support. In France, Belgium, and the Ardennes, platoon-level ambushes crippled German counterattacks before they could gather momentum. During the Battle of the Bulge, reports described entire Panther units immobilized not by massed artillery, but by small, agile teams firing from roadside woods. The psychological toll was immense. Once, the sight of German armor meant retreat. Now, even a rifle squad could stand and fight. For the Germans, the change was devastating. Their armored thrusts, built on shock, speed, and confidence, lost initiative. Every offensive required coordination, reconnaissance, and costly infantry escorts. Strategically, the bazooka democratized anti-tank warfare, erasing the gap between mechanized and foot soldiers. Eisenhower later called it the great equalizer of the battlefield. On the Eastern Front, Soviet observers took careful notes, developing shaped charge grenades like the RPG-43 and eventually the post-war RPG-2, direct heirs to the American idea of a personal rocket weapon. The balance of power between armor and infantry had shifted forever. The bazooka had not only pierced steel, it had pierced the very doctrine of mechanized supremacy, ushering in a new era of portable firepower that would define the Cold War battlefield. For all its battlefield legend, the 2.36-inch bazooka remained a weapon of compromises. Against early and mid-war armor, it performed admirably, but by 1944 its limits were painfully clear. The thick, sloped frontal plates of Panthers and Tigers mocked its shaped charge warhead, which could pierce about 75 to 100 millimeters only at near-perfect angles. To score a kill, infantrymen had to maneuver dangerously close, striking from the flanks or rear where armor was thinner. Many teams described the terror of crawling through hedgerows to within 40 yards. One chance to fire before the tank's coaxial machine gun swept the area. In wet European weather, battery contacts often failed, rockets misfired or dispersed unpredictably. A missed shot meant instant exposure. The backblast's flash and smoke betrayed the firer's position, forcing hasty movement after every launch. These hard lessons traveled back through the Ordnance Department with unusual speed. By 1945, design bureaus were already working on a larger model, the 3.5-inch M20, soon dubbed the Super Bazooka. Weighing just over 7 kilograms and firing a 9-pound rocket, it could penetrate more than 280 millimeters of armor, enough to defeat even a Tiger's front plate. The principle was the same, but every component had been refined. Sturdier ignition circuits, better propellant, and improved ballistic stability. Other nations followed parallel paths. German engineers evolved their Panzerschreck into heavier variants with improved shields, while Soviet designers took inspiration to create their RPG-43 and later, the shoulder-fired RPG-2. Thus, the bazooka's shortcomings became seeds of innovation. Its story was not only about triumph, but about adaptation. A weapon born of desperation that forced every army to rethink how a single soldier could challenge the reign of armor. When the guns of 1945 finally fell silent, the bazooka's echo carried far beyond Europe. What had begun as a hurried experiment at Aberdeen Proving Ground became the foundation of post-war infantry. Firepower. U.S. forces refined the launcher into the 3.5-inch M20 Super Bazooka, a weapon that reappeared only 5 years later. On the cold hills of Korea, there, American troops faced Soviet-built T-34-85 tanks, machines tougher than any Panther yet vulnerable once again to a shoulder-fired rocket. Its success confirmed the enduring logic of the design: light, cheap, and devastating at close range. Allied and former Axis nations alike adopted or copied it. France produced the El-Rak series. Britain fielded its Piat successors under American influence. China manufactured the Type 51, a near-identical clone of the M20. And even the Soviets, who had once studied captured models, shaped the concept into the RPG family that would dominate Cold War battlefields. The very word bazooka entered everyday language as shorthand for any shoulder-launched weapon, a linguistic monument to its impact. Doctrinally, the shift was profound. Every modern infantry platoon after 1945 carried portable anti-armor firepower as standard, no longer dependent on attached artillery or tank destroyers. The bazooka had democratized destruction, giving the ordinary soldier the means to challenge mechanized might. Yet its legend lives most vividly in the memories of those who first saw its flame. German veterans recalled the disbelief as Panthers and Tigers burned from a single man's shot, proof that even the strongest armor could be undone by a simple idea forged in necessity. The bazooka's legacy was not just a weapon, but a principle, that ingenuity, speed, and courage could rewrite the laws of war. Summer 1944, Normandy lay beneath a haze of smoke and shattered hedgerows. In the fields around St. Lo, German officers stared in disbelief as their proud Panthers and Tigers, symbols of armored supremacy, smoldered from single surgical hits fired by men hidden in the brush. The weapon that felled them was no cannon, no artillery barrage, but a light steel tube no longer than the soldier who carried it. With it, the age-old balance between man and machine had shifted. The bazooka had proved that ingenuity could defeat mass, that a moment of invention could humble years of engineering. For the American infantryman, it was liberation from helplessness. For the German tanker, the end of invulnerability. The weapon's hiss and flash became the sound of a new era, one where courage, improvisation, and precision mattered more than thickness of armor. From that moment, no tank could advance without fear. No commander could trust steel alone to carry the day. As the guns quieted and the hedgerow fields fell silent again, the message was unmistakable. Warfare had entered the age of the individual, a world where a single soldier, armed with invention and resolve, could alter the fate of a battle. The day steel met its match was not only a victory for the Allies, it was the dawn of modern warfare itself.